Pro football just after World War I was an interesting period in gridiron history indeed, as what would become the NFL was just starting up, and there were other, and I say this loosely, leagues where paid football players took the field. One of those was a short-lived group of teams in the coal region of eastern Pennsylvania, fondly called the Anthracite League. Historian Joe Zagorski visits us in the Pigpen to talk about this and more, coming up in a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pigpen, your portal to positive football history. And we have a really special evening tonight planned because we're going to be talking to a great football historian and author of multiple books and a podcast host here on Sports History Network, Joe Zagorski. You've heard him here before, and tonight we're going to talk about something special. Joe Zagorski, welcome back to the Pigpen.
Hey, thanks for welcoming me. I appreciate being here.
Well, we're sure glad to have you, Joe. And just a little bit of a side note. I know I told you before we came on, but just so the audience knows, a few weeks ago I was doing some research on some football from the pro leagues of the coal mining region of Pennsylvania, and I came across an article from the PFRA from 1987's Coffin Corner, and it was authored by one Joe Zagorski. And I said, oh my goodness, what an honor I can talk to Joe again and have about his article that he wrote a few decades ago.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that I've been at this in one way, shape, or form for that many years. Certainly hasn't been a full-time job or anything, but I've enjoyed exploring the history of pro football, and a lot of people don't realize that just because you're in a separate section of the country, the coal regions of Pennsylvania, it had its own flavor. And the NFL at that time in the mid-1920s was basically still a brand new league. And not a whole lot of thought was given to, hey, this league is going to last 50 or 60 years. Nobody thought about that at the time. So nobody really had any preconceived notions for the coal region league either. And so, these guys would go and they would play for whoever would pay them more money. Yeah, it's not uncommon to see that there's people that played in the coal region that would play for up to 3 or 4 different teams in one season. They'd be hopping around the league. Whoever paid them more money, that's who they would play for on any given weekend.
Well, that is, that's incredible that, and it really, what is the geographic area? Now, I know it's eastern Pennsylvania, but what do they sort of call that, the coal mining region?
Schuylkill County is the main county, and a lot of people, the main town in Schuylkill County is Pottsville, and it gets a lot of notoriety because Pottsville had an NFL team for 3 years, 4 years, 25 through 28, the Pottsville Maroons. And a lot of other of the teams in that era, they pretty much still played, but they weren't on the level of Pottsville. And a lot of people confuse Pottsville. I grew up and I was born and raised in a town called Pottstown. And a lot of people think they're right next to each other, but they're not. Pottstown is about an hour and 20 minutes southeast of Pottsville. And as far as, driving time. But they might have been, I know Pottstown was named after John Potts, and he may have been the same guy that named Pottsville. I'm not sure. Maybe a relative of his or not. But the Pottsville Maroons had a very strong pro football team, and they had some players on them that not only played in the other teams in the NFL, but also are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Wilbur Fats Henry comes to mind. John Blood McNally. Those guys are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and they played for those Pottsville teams. So it was they had notoriety, and the theory was that the coal region teams were they played a rough and tough brand of football, and I'm sure they did. But a lot of people believe that it was just filled with guys that worked in the coal mines and then came out and played football. Well, that's not completely true. There were some who did. One famous guy was Tony Latone, and he worked in the coal mines and then played for the Pottsville Maroons. But most of the guys actually were college educated, and they played for college teams before they went pro. So they didn't just come on out and beat the crap out of each other. There was some sophistication to them and to their stories. So.
Yeah, when you mentioned Tony Latone, we did an article about him probably about a month ago, and one thing that amazed me, I didn't really know much about him until I was doing that podcast. And one thing that I read is that George Halas said something to the effect that if Tony Latone would have played college ball, he might have been one of the best pro players ever. And there was a lot of comparisons made to the yardage that Latone did when he played for Pottsville in comparison to what Red Grange did in the same era. And it was actually the statistics were kind of comparable if you look at it from some of the things that I saw. But, of course, he didn't play much college ball. He went right into the semi-pros and playing for the teams of his coal mining company, I guess. And I heard
the same story. I guess it was in the early 1990s. I drove from Pennsylvania down to Florida, and I got a chance to spend a couple of days with Tony's son, who was living in Florida at the time. And he was originally from Michigan. And I got a chance to talk to him about his father. His father had long since passed, but he was an interesting character, Tony Latone. And I lost touch with Tony's son. I think he moved back to Michigan because he got tired of the pelicans landing on his roof at night in Florida. And very few pelicans in Michigan. Very few.
That's for sure. They don't like the cold of Lake Michigan, do they?
No, very few. If you see a pelican in Michigan, it's probably, a plastic one in somebody's yard or something like that.
Yeah.
No, he gave me some really good stories about Tony Latone. I think I wrote an article about him for the PFRA prior to the article that you were talking about with the Anthracite Football League. He was an interesting character, but they were all interesting characters. I got a chance to meet a couple of them, but sadly, most of them were so old that their memories were shot, and you really couldn't get too much out of them, which is a shame. But that's what happens, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's sad. It happens to all of us at all walks and all around the world. It's one of those things, death and taxes and old age sort of deteriorates. It's they say that with the youth is spoiled on the young, or something to that effect.
Well, I got a chance to interview another guy who was a child at the time, and he had good memories of it, and he was actually in a program that NFL Films did about the 1920s in the NFL, and I got a chance to meet him, and I interviewed him, and he was a very interesting fellow, a guy by the name of Bill Dimmerling. He gave me some really good information that I didn't know it at the time, but it served as some information for my eventual screenplay that I wrote about coal region football. So,
are you able to talk about your screenplay at all, about what the basic premise is of it, or would you rather not discuss that?
Well, I'll just briefly talk about it. It's set in the year 1924, and it's about a rivalry between two teams, and it basically covers the week before the game, and then the game, and then the aftermath of the game, and it's based on a true story. So most of it is true, and it really happened. And I have corroboration from a lot of different newspaper articles that I was able to find in the Pottsville Historical Society. You know, I think I better stop with that. But
okay.
When I get more information as far as if I'm able to sell it to a producer or a film company, I'll definitely post that information. And once I know that it's being made into a film, then I can talk more freely about it, I think.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, any producers out there, directors are looking for a good film, we know how to get in contact with a guy that's got a great screenplay for you. So, you know, you can contact the Sports History Network, and we'll get in touch with Joe or Pigskin Dispatch, and we'll get Joe on the line and get you hooked up. So it sounds like a great film to watch, something I'd want to watch, that's for sure.
Well, you know, it's funny because, like, when I tell people about it, they say the same thing. They say, well, yeah, that sounds really good. But, you know, if you don't have, like, solicitation, if you don't have a manager, nobody in Hollywood wants to give you the time of day. So it's just being lucky enough to get one person to look at it. That's the key. And it has to be the right person, you know, somebody with contacts.
That seems to be the case in a lot of things in life to succeed, isn't it?
Yeah, you're not kidding.
Well, going back to the Anthracite League. So was it an official league of teams, or was it one of those that were sort of like a mythological or an idea, or just a bunch of teams that commonly played each other?
It's a good question. In name only, really. In the newspaper in 1924, it was listed as the Anthracite Football League, but that was only 1 year, and in 1925, nobody mentioned it anymore. So really, it was a 1-year league, and not every team played every week. That's one thing I wanted to mention, is that some teams didn't know if they were going to play that weekend until like 2 days before the game. We're just a few weeks away from the NFL's schedule being, you know, broadcast on television for 2022. Well, in 1924, 1925, you guys, I mean, those guys didn't know from 1 week to the next who they would be playing, some of them. You know, that just goes to show how disorganized that league was, and that region was, as far as getting teams to be played. Pottsville in 1924 played 14 games. Wilkes-Barre played 1 game. Gilberton played 8 games, as did Shenandoah, and Coaldale played 10 games. So, you know, and some of the teams that they played weren't even a part of the league. Gilberton beat a team called Palmerton. You know, I mean, it's like, so some of these teams you'd never heard of. Hobart Athletic Club, they lost to Shenandoah. You know, now Reading had a team. They were a bigger town, but they weren't part of the Anthracite League. Atlantic City, New Jersey, was considered a team that was not in the Anthracite League, but they beat Coaldale. So they would play whoever they could find, and they would count it as a league game, even though it's not. So.
Now, did they have like a postseason or have a championship or declare a champion from that region?
They did, and it wasn't a championship game. It was just whoever had the most wins, and that was Pottsville. They finished with a record of 12-1-1. So
that's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, and the next closest team percentage-wise was Gilberton, and they finished with a record of 4-3-1. So, you get 8 more wins, yeah, you're going to be declared a champion. Of course, that 24 season was a springboard for Pottsville because they kind of said, okay, we won 12 games this year. Let us join this National Football League that just started a few years ago. And they put up the money, and they, George Hallis let them in, and they played in 1925, and that was a whole different story in regards to Pottsville. And if you ever do any research on them, you'll hear about the stolen championship, which
Yeah, we've talked about that a couple of times with a few of our guests that have come on. And Pottsville's kind of an interesting thing, especially 1925 when they came in, and along with Frankfurt that played, I believe, in that same era. There's 2 Pennsylvania teams that played during Pennsylvania's blue laws. We weren't supposed to play on Sundays. I think one of them, the teams did. I forget which one did, but
well, Frankfurt got upset because Pottsville went down into Philadelphia to play these Notre Dame All-Stars who were well past their prime. And it was just more or less an exhibition game, but Frankfurt got upset because they figured, you're in our territory, you're taking spectators away from our gate receipts, and that's not fair. And the commissioner at the time, I think it was Burt Bell.
It was Joe Carr at the time.
Oh, it was Joe Carr? Okay, my mistake. Joe Carr, and he said, Frankfurt's got a case here, and so he penalized Pottsville and made them. He took away their championship, and he kind of made the Chicago Cardinals play 2 extra games to give them a better record. And, that gave them the championship, the Chicago Cardinals, even though those 2 extra games were against, I think one of them was against high school kids.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't really always on the up and up. And I know over the years, Pottsville has tried to get the NFL to change their minds, and give them back the championship, but the Cardinal organization is never going to surrender that championship. They're just not. So that's, and the league doesn't want, nobody's alive from 1925 that really remembers that. I don't.
It's interesting because I've heard, you're probably about the 4th guest that we've talked about that game and that whole situation. And, we've talked, of course, Joe Ziemba's been on, talked it from the Cardinals' perspective. Chris Willis has been on, talked about it from sort of the NFL's perch, and hit the Joe Carr and, Columbus Panhandle's approach of that whole situation. That's how I knew it was Joe Carr. It wasn't because I was smart. It's just because I remember, Chris talking about it. And, we've talked about some guests that are in support of, Pottsville should get the championship awarded to them and everything. It's an interesting concept. I don't know if it will ever be resolved. I know it was just a few years ago, I think they petitioned the NFL and lost the case too. So it's been pretty recent, even it's lasted 100 years almost.
If you ever get a chance to go to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio, they have a pretty neat display on it that explains it all. And I every now and I'm going up there in a couple of weeks to do some more research, but it's they try to address everything that happened back in that era. And although I have to admit, I think the Hall of Fame that the Green Bay Packers have is a little bit better. So
is it really? I've never been to I've never been up in Green Bay, but I was in Canton twice last year. Well, the PFRA convention was there last year, so I was there for that. And I went to Hall of Fame weekend, had the opportunity to go down. Of course, there was 5 Steelers going in between the 2 classes, so definitely was a great one to attend there. And the Steelers played that weekend too. So but yeah, you're right. That display is awesome. It's great. The whole museum is really much improved over the last 6-7 years.
if you ever get to Lambeau Field, check out their museum and their Hall of Fame. It's really neat. It's not as big as the Pro Football Hall of Fame because you're only dealing with one team, but the displays are really neat. It's definitely worth it. I mean, there isn't much around Green Bay. There's a casino. There's like a walking tour through town and stuff like that, but Lambeau Field is the main attraction in Green Bay, and it always has been. I think if it wasn't for the Packers, I don't know what kind of tourism that town would have. I shudder to think that it would have any, but they get visitors all the time, and their gift shop in there is like 2 stories tall. It's big.
Wow, and I bet you really the population spikes about 8 times a year there, huh?
Yeah. With preseason games, yeah.
That's really interesting. Now, I want to talk about you had a recent podcast on your Pro Football in the 1970s podcast, which was very well done. And one that I just talked about, your most recent podcast is on the 1974 Steelers draft class and rookie class, I guess it is a better term for it. And great job on that. And I was talking last Saturday. I do every Saturday I have a release on some Northwestern Pennsylvania football history. So I was talking about the 69 draft with Joe Green and John Kolb and L.C. Greenwood and Terry Hanratty and a few other minor players, and sort of comparing those 2 drafts. But I referenced quite a bit of what you said in your 74 Steelers draft. But I think I agree with you. I don't know if there will ever be any team that'll, before or after, that'll have a rookie class like that with 5 Hall of Famers.
I highly doubt it. I really do. When you consider the fact that today in this day and age, what are there, like 7 or 8 rounds, maybe? I think, to think that 5 selections that your team made are in the Hall of Fame, and they equated to, at that time, 4 world championships. That's really just astounding. Just really incredible that one team was able to do that well in the draft. And I'm good friends with Terry Hanratty and Rocky Blyer today. So
wow.
Rocky wrote the foreword to my first book about the NFL in the 1970s, and I've been friends with Terry for several years, and I've interviewed him quite a few times. So
wow, you have a great circle of friends, I'll tell you.
Yeah, well, I'm not married, so that's you gotta have friends somewhere, and I was telling another podcast last night that if I was married, I probably wouldn't be able to do all the writing that I've been doing, because there's just not enough time, you get 24 hours in a day. How do you use it, so.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true. I'm very blessed. I have a very understanding wife, and she knows my football addiction, so I get away with some things.
Yeah, well, you got to mention that up front before you get serious. That's for sure. Yeah,
that's for sure.
It's like anything else, though. I mean, I would prefer that you get all the information out before you make any decision. It's the same thing with buying a car. So.
Yeah, you got to have all those skeletons out of the closet up front, right?
That's right.
Now, when you talk about writing, that's a good segue. I know that you were telling me before we came on the air that you have a book that is about ready to go into print, and I don't know if maybe you want to talk about that a little bit, give us a little tease what is on the horizon in the Joe Zagorski writing world.
Well, I just finished writing a book on the 1973 Buffalo Bills. I guess you could sense that I've got a lot of love for the 70s, and I do, because it's when I grew up watching pro football. And I knew that nobody had ever written about the 73 Bills before. And I thought, this is the 50-year anniversary of that team. They were a very historic team. They finished 9-5. They almost made the playoffs. They didn't, but they came within a whisker of making the playoffs. But what was really great about them was all the different records that they set. They set the team rushing record that had only been set the year before by the Dolphins. Well, they broke that largely because of O.J. Simpson became the first man ever, in fact, the first man only, to rush for 2,000 yards in one 14-game season. It's since been eclipsed by several people, but they all did it in a 16-game season. And it'll get broken again because now we're at 17 games of a regular season. So, I kind of think that it'll get broken again, but O.J. Simpson's the only man who has ever rushed for over 2,000 yards in a 14-game season, and that'll never change. I got a chance to interview him a few weeks ago, and I've been trying to interview him for many years, and I finally struck gold and got a chance to interview him. So I was very fortunate and got a lot of good quotes from him for the book.
Well, gosh, that sounds very intriguing. I can't wait. You'll have to let us know when that gets ready to come out and hits the print so we can all get it in our hands and read up on what you have to say about that.
Sure will, yeah. It's, I had to address certain things about it. I wasn't allowed to ask Mr. Simpson any questions about what happened to him in the 1990s. I couldn't even, vaguely address that, which I agreed to. I wasn't going to go there, and I promised both him and his manager that I wouldn't. I gave him a list of questions ahead of time, and he signed off on them. He was okay with them, so that was important, and I got some good information from him. Most of the teammates that I interviewed for the book, they didn't want to talk about him after football, but two of them did, and one of them said that he felt that he was innocent, and the other one said he felt he was guilty. So that was, and they said a little bit more than that, but that was the extent of it. All the other ones wouldn't go on the record, and that's to be expected. I don't think a publisher's gonna really fault me for that because it's such a taboo subject. So.
Yeah, that's walking on eggshells, that's for sure.
But it's finished. The book is finished, and I'm trying to get a publishing company to, say yes and publish it. So.
Well, hopefully you'll be hearing from a publisher real soon, and a movie producer or movie house or something, whoever does that kind of work, and get your works out there because they both sound extremely exciting. And speaking of that, are you able to tell us what we can look forward to on the next Pro Football in the 1970s podcast? Actually,
no, I can't, because I don't know what it's going to be.
Oh, okay.
You see, I gave Arnie like about 3 of them, and I don't know which ones what order they're in. So I wrote them. I put them together. I guess it was like over a month ago, and I can't remember. So I'm 59 now, so I'm not able to remember like I used to things. So you'll just have to wait with everybody else, including me.
So somewhere up in Michigan, Mr. Chapman has a hat with 3 pieces of paper in it with your podcast, and he's going to draw one out here one of these days, and
that's right.
We'll see what that's coming on there.
Yeah.
So
him, yeah.
All right. Well, Joe, I really appreciate you spending the time and sharing, information from this article you wrote, 30 some years ago, and all the other great conversations we had in this short time. We appreciate you taking the time to visit us here in the Pig Pen once again.
Well, I'm very thankful for the opportunity, Darren. you take care of yourself and have a great NFL draft coming up.
We're taking a peek over at the chains and the down marker. It's 4th and long. We're going to have to punt the ball and get on out of here, but we'll have another series tomorrow for your football history headlines, so be sure to tune in. We invite you to check out our website, PigskinDispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. PigskinDispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast. PigskinDispatch.com is a proud affiliate of the Sports History Network, the headquarters of sports yesteryear.
Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandom at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.